and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's time for the amazing, epic, knockdown, blowout, ruffle, tuffle, scrappy, heavyweight bout between arguably the two leading smartphone cameras, the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra and the iPhone 12 Pro. And no, I'm not going to keep talking like that. Fasten your seatbelts because this is going to be quite a ride, and now that I've completely and totally 100% unequivocally oversold this segment, let's dive in. Both cameras are really, really good. I'm just kidding. You're getting a full look here. But since it's been almost 3 months since I reviewed both of these phones, there's been a lot of build-up, and I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Comparing two cameras like the Galaxy S21 Ultra and the iPhone 12 Pro is a challenge because honestly, they're both just really good. So it really comes down to just nitpicking, which isn't fun for anyone. What I will say is that there are two areas, well, 1.5, where one camera is demonstrably better than the other, and that's going to come at the end because I don't want you to turn this off after the first minute, and that's Marketing 101. To run this test, I took a series of photos and videos with both cameras in auto mode. And when you get to this level of camera, it's a given that you can make any photo look any way you want if you go into Pro mode and you know how to use Pro mode, or if you capture photos in RAW files and edit them in Lightroom later on. But not every shot has to be the one where you stop, take out your phone, fiddle with the aperture and the exposure, and oh, the ISO's a little bit too high, and then you have to adjust the focus and yada yada yada, whatever. Sometimes, in fact I'd argue most of the time, you just want to whip out your phone and grab a shot. Or at least that's what I want to do, and it's my podcast, so yeah. Now, right off the bat, when there's good light, you're going to notice that Samsung photos are generally a little bit lighter than iPhone photos, and that's not anything new. But while iPhones like to keep photos more, quote, realistic, you can often lose a lot of details in darker subjects. Similarly, when there's a strong backlight, Samsung gives you a little bit more detail in the foreground, while the iPhone loses that detail in the foreground darkness and the backlight. Samsung tends to give a better natural bokeh around subjects, while the background on the iPhone actually remains pretty sharp. Now, both phones do very well in keeping color consistency when transferring from one lens to the other. The difference here is that the 10x zoom lens of the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra has a much smaller aperture, so it tends to get a lot darker. And speaking of 10x zoom, just holy crap, dude. Okay, now spoiler alert, zoom is going to be a significant portion of this conversation. You don't really notice the color difference between the 3x zoom and the 10x zoom too much when there's bright sunlight everywhere, but at night, it's a very, very stark difference. Speaking of dark photos, that's a lot of our conversation as well. The iPhone does really well in darkness, maintaining a wider depth of field, meaning photos will often be sharper, though definitely darker, with less detail in the shadows. Samsung, on the other hand, brightens up photos a bit and stays focused on the subject nicely, but loses focus on other objects around the subject very easily. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course, because, of course there are. There's only so much that glass and sensors can actually do. The rest is up to software processing, and I think Samsung has done more and better work in this area. It's nothing against the iPhone, surely. Indeed, there are some cases when the iPhone clearly outshines the Samsung. Low-light photos are really hard, and even in an age when you have two cameras that stand so decisively above the rest of the field, except for possibly Huawei, but I've never tested a Huawei phone myself, so I can't speak to that. Anyway, even those two decisive phones struggle in this area of low-light photography, but man, oh man, they are so much better than they used to be. It's actually really exciting, and don't forget, I've still got the OnePlus 9 Pro and the Xperia Mark III phones to play with this year, so this is not the end of the conversation, not by a long shot. Selfies and portrait modes are also very good on these phones. Action shots are possible, but as with most phones, auto is not the place to try to grab these shots. Those will be best shot in manual mode or burst mode because phones are trying to suck in as much light as possible in auto mode, so motion really screws things up. Moving on to video, when you're walking along with the phone in front of you, the iPhone generally does a better job with smoothing out the footage and giving you a nice, smooth walk and talk, and filtering out things like wind noise. On the literal flip side, the walk and talk test for the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra looks like you're running the camera on a track. It is damn smooth. And if you're a vlogger, this is no contest. As for exposure, the iPhone is a bit more on the dramatic side. When you move from a dark area into a lighter area, there's a pretty big shift from one end of the spectrum to the other. Samsung seems to smooth things out a little more to make the transition a little less stark. Overall, there's very little to complain about on either phone from the video end. In terms of smoothing and panning, I'd give a slight edge to the iPhone, whereas the Ultra does a better job with colors and exposure. There's no clear winner here, but the good news is that also means that there's no clear loser either. And yes, I like it here on the fence just fine. Thank you very much. But there is one area, well, 1.5 areas, where the Ultra pantses the iPhone and takes its lunch money, and that is in zoom. I mean, people, it's not even close. The iPhone has an ultra-wide sensor, a main sensor, and a 2x telephoto sensor. The Galaxy Ultra has an ultra-wide, main, 3x, and 10x optical zoom sensors. Plus, Samsung's AI gets very decent 30x hybrid zoom. Now, 100x zoom, still pretty much a gimmick for sure, except when it comes to moonshots. When you consider the moonshots that I have grabbed by hand, it's really remarkable. We talked a few weeks back about that piece from Input Mag that debunked the software trickery suspected of Samsung, and seeing these shots that I got, I can totally understand why there was so much speculation. Getting back to zoom and hybrid zoom, that is not a gimmick. Now, you definitely won't grab a precious photo of things at 100x, but 30x? Yeah, you could probably get away with it. The iPhone has really good optical zoom at 2x, which is nice, but when you look at how much closer the Samsung Galaxy Ultra can get you, not only is it not in the same ballpark, it's barely even the same game. Take, for example, my daughter's gymnastic competitions. When you see the difference between how close you can get with an iPhone and how close you can get with the Ultra, it's laughable, and that's really what it boils down to. If you're a parent, this is an absolute no-brainer. It's not like you can walk out onto the floor or up onto the stage to take photos or videos, but with the S21 Ultra, you basically can, assuming that we ever go up on stage or out onto the floor again. Adding zoom to the iPhone is nice, and it is valuable, but all other things being equal, the zoom the Ultra is capable of is not only a feature, it's a slam dunk. Not that this iPhone is bad, far from it. In many ways, the iPhone meets or exceeds what the S21 is capable of. But in one area, it's no contest. And you might be thinking, well, sure, if I need to zoom in, well, how often do I need to do that? And that's a fair point. And if you don't have kids, probably not nearly as often. But this is simply a case of better to have it and not need it. And the fact is that the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra has it, and nobody else, iPhone, OnePlus, Motorola, nobody else has it. And I have no doubt that they will have it someday, but today, Samsung has it in spades, which is why I hesitate to declare a, air quotes, winner here, but I definitely have to give the nod to the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra.